Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen, my co-host, Joe Clark. There's a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, the Steelers played their first preseason game last Friday. They've got another one coming up on Saturday. They just had the joint practice with the Bills today. Training camp is done, at least the public portion where they're in Latrobe at St. Vincent College, and so Joe, does it feel like camp went really quick or really long for you?
Honestly, I feel like it went really quick, and I feel that way kind of almost every year. You look at the schedule and it's like, oh, it's 3 weeks, like it's a grind, and then all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, it's over. So, I guess maybe it's because a lot of the days just kind of bleed together. But yeah, no, it did feel like it went really quick for me.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. It definitely, this was my first full time with the site, first camp. I know this is what, your second or third now. So, yeah, definitely an experience, definitely a grind, but it was a lot of fun. And, now that we're into the preseason stuff, it's even more fun. There's a lot of tape to dive into. I know we've had a bunch of film rooms up on the site and stuff this week. That's my personal favorite part of this job, is just being able to dive into the tape and just kind of enjoy the actual football now that it's here. So that is our first topic for the day. We're going to dive into the preseason week 1 game last week against the Houston Texans. Joe, do you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, so honestly, I mean, it was a sloppy performance, as Mike Tomlin said, but all around it wasn't really, that bad. I would say. I think you saw some issues. Quez Watkins in the punt return game was an issue. Obviously the muff snap was huge, and then there's one snap that he probably had 15 yards of space around and didn't run it back. And then the QB center exchanges. There was two fumbles. One of them was a gain of 4 yards. The other one was a loss of yardage that kind of killed the drive. The gain of 4 yards just kind of, I guess that's part of the Justin Fields experience, right? Like it looks like the play is going nowhere, and all of a sudden he picks it up and runs and kind of falls forward for 4 yards. So, but yeah, those are obviously issues. Like you can't have that throughout the course of the season. Um, all in all, though, like for the preseason game, I think there's probably more things good to take away than bad. Throwing the ball, at least Fields, looked pretty solid. You had, the offensive line, the one drive that Dejon Edwards had the 27 or something yard run and then punch in for the touchdown. The offensive line run blocking generally looked pretty solid. So for the most part, like, yeah, they lost. It wasn't a great game, but they also played, Kyle Allen for the whole second half, a lot of backups in the game. I mean, it was a low scoring game. So given how the first team looked, you would have liked to see them punch one in or, at least settle for a field goal at one point. The fumble killed that on the first drive. And then Justin Fields did take 2 sacks that weren't great. Definitely something that needs to get cleaned up as, we further progress if he wants to, really play a role for this team down the line. But without Russell Wilson out there, I thought, things kind of generally went as expected. But I will say, I think the snap exchanges, even though I wouldn't put them all on Herbig, there's one especially that definitely looked like it was Justin Fields' fault. But getting chemistry between a quarterback and center is huge. So I do think it did open up the door for Zach Frazier to start. Herbig's injury now, notwithstanding that he suffered this week. So that would probably be, I mean, I think that's the biggest takeaway from, what we saw from the first team was those were two pretty big issues. The fumble exchanges, or the snap exchanges that led to fumbles. But overall, I mean, Fields was fine. He looked all right. He had the nice third event. Jefferson, that was I think it was a 20-yard gain. And more or less the offense kind of looked how we thought they would. So I'm not really worrying too much, especially given, you had 7 key players not playing that game. Especially TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Isaac Seumalo, Patrick Queen all out. So I'm excited to see how things look on Saturday against Buffalo.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 sacks that Fields took. I did think one of them was more on him. The other one, it kind of looks bad on him, but if you go back and look, I think it was Pickens and Fryermuth were one of them ran the wrong route because they were basically almost collided, and so there was nowhere for Fields to go with that ball, and the pocket was collapsing quick. So I don't necessarily fault him for both of them, but certainly he has taken a lot of sacks throughout his career, and he holds on to the ball. Him and Russell Wilson both really hold on to the ball longer than anyone else in the league. At least they did last year. And so, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a concern, especially with this young offensive line. And, there's going to be some growing pains. I think we saw that with Troy Fautanu in particular, unfortunately, letting up. I think PFF credited it or dinged him for 1 sack allowed, but I really think probably both of the sacks were on Fauntanu more than anybody else. I thought Fauntanu overall it was not that pretty. I did a film room on him on the site, breaking down his play. I do think there's a lot of adjustments still going on with him moving over to the right side. He had 29 starts at left tackle in college, and he was really working in an offense that primarily passed the ball, and he was working with a left-handed quarterback, so he was over there on, I guess, not the blind side, over there on the left. So there's a lot of adjustment moving over to the right for him, and I think that is showing quite a bit, at least with his first game. But Jerry Dulac this week reported that Fauntanu, I guess that the plan is, I guess even with the injuries, the plan is to have Fauntanu be the week 1 starter. That took me honestly by a little bit of surprise, especially being announced after the preseason game in which he got injured. Now that injury wasn't major. Our Dr. Melanie Friedlander posted an excellent article up on the site just kind of breaking down where that injury might have happened, the timetable for return. It all kind of aligns with the Jeremy Fowler report that says it was a mild MCL sprain, probably a grade 1, which is a 1 or 2 week recovery time. Mike Tomlin ruled him out for the week, but did express optimism that he'd be back pretty quickly. And so, I don't know if we can fully rule him out of that final preseason game. I think that would certainly help his case, but man, I have a hard time seeing him being the week 1 starter if he's not able to play in that game. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that was honestly really surprising for me. I thought, his injury and keeping out of practice was going to give us another year of Dan Moore Jr. on the left side with Broderick Jones on the right side. But Dulac's report made it seem like the team really does trust Fautanu and is ready for him to kind of take over as the starter, which is what we did think kind of heading into camp. At least I was pretty confident that Fautanu would start given his collegiate experience and how many snaps he's played. Even though going to the right side was an adjustment, which, he readily admitted, but it seemed as if, throughout camp he was getting better. And yeah, I agree with you. He didn't really impress me that much in the preseason game. But I do go back to Broderick Jones, his first preseason game. He allowed a sack to I think it was an undrafted free agent, like a guy that didn't even make the roster, and he cooked Broderick Jones and got a sack on Kenny Pickett. So I don't necessarily know if I'm worried about Fautanu, but I think, be surprised if he was the week 1 starter, given the fact that, Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin are historically pretty cautious with their rookies, and that he's missed this week of practice. He's not going to play in the second preseason game. And even if he comes back next week, that's still a week of practice that a rookie misses. And I think it might be an uphill battle for him to start, but hey, if they want to start him, I think it's probably the right decision, because if you get into a situation where, and it's not even a worst case scenario because it would probably be a good thing, but hey, Dan Moore Jr. is really good at left tackle and Broderick Jones is playing well at right tackle. Well, then is this a redshirt year for Fautanu? And then you have to worry about hey, do you want to keep Dan Moore? And then it feels like a waste of a 1st round pick. Obviously, it's great if both those guys play well, but I think we have enough historical evidence to go back on that. Dan Moore Jr. is probably a below average left tackle. Broderick Jones, we haven't seen enough on the left side to make, any sort of declaration. So I think it is best long-term for the Steelers if he does start, fairly early in his rookie season. And I think it's going to be tough to almost make that switch early in the season. Last season you had Chukwuma Okorafor only got benched because he made a comment that Mike Tomlin didn't like. And whether that was an excuse or not for starting Broderick Jones, which it very well may have been. I don't know if you can run that excuse back this year if Dan Moore Jr. Isn't playing well, and then it's he said something bad, so he's benched. We're gonna give this guy a chance. So yeah, I would like to see him start. I think just because I want to get that development out of him, and starting early. But as we'll talk about later, going up against Week 1 in Atlanta, and Matthew Judon's not going to be very easy. So it'll be interesting to see what the team does. Personally, from my perspective, I'm with you. I think it would be very hard for him to get in the starting lineup Week 1, given the time he's missed. But under Omar Khan, the Steelers have done, some things that aren't typical. And if they want to kind of push Fautanu to the forefront and give him the starting job, then I guess it wouldn't completely surprise me. It's just kind of tough to see as things stand right now.
Yeah, I think there were some mixed reactions to my film room. Obviously, pretty negative slant. I did preface at the beginning, like, hey, I'm not like sounding any alarm bells here. This is his first preseason game. Honestly, I did his scouting report for the website back during the pre-draft process, and a lot of the issues that were apparent on his tape were not issues at all on the college tape. So I'm not concerned. I think it's just more adjusting to the speed of the game, adjusting to life on the right side. In particular, I think his use of hands. He was really good at that in college. That was one of his best traits. Was he had quick and impactful hand usage. I think he was kind of struggling to get that first significant contact that offensive line coach Pat Meyer likes to see from the offensive linemen. And so, I think it's fixable, but I do, as we have just talked about, I do worry if he's not able to play in the preseason. Are we just throwing him out there? And like you said, Matthew Judon, that would be a pretty difficult week one job for Fauntanu. And we'll dive into the Falcons matchup a little bit in a little bit here. I did want to touch on a couple more preseason week one topics. Van Jefferson, I think he was pretty impressive to me. He only had the one catch, but really he had the two catches. I think if that one was challenged along the sideline, probably would have been overturned. I don't know if Mike Tomlin would bother throwing a challenge flag in the preseason. I think did he last year? I don't know, but either way, I think if it was a real game scenario, Van Jefferson would have hauled in two catches for what would have been, I believe, like 36 yards or 31 yards, somewhere in that range. And both of them kind of deep completions. I think one of them was an explosive play of 20 yards. So you love to see that, especially, Brandon Ayuk. Who knows what's happening there? Wide receiver 2 battle seems to be in Van Jefferson's favor. And so I think he showed some pretty solid play in that first game to make me think, as long as they're supplementing him with guys like Freiermuth and maybe some of these speedy guys occasionally, that the offense could work even if they don't acquire Ayuk. Were there any other preseason topics or anything that, any players that maybe caught your eye before we move on here?
Nothing in any major capacity. I was excited to see Corey Trice Jr. make a play. He had a stop, screen pass. He read it perfectly, broke on the play. I think it was a 3-yard loss, so that was exciting to see. Both outside linebackers, Jeremiah Moon and Kyron Johnson. Moon had a sack. It was kind of he came in free. I think I think it was Graham Arnold who came out on the blitz, got picked up, and Jeremiah Moon came in untouched, and then Kyron Johnson had the play on the end around that they'd ran twice before for a pretty sizable gain, and he came in and read it perfectly and made the stop. So that was kind of, I like seeing that. And then just my general thoughts on, I think Mason McCormick and Zach Frazier they're really good in the run blocking game. Out of looking at the rookies and backup offensive line, I thought the run blocking was really solid. But I wouldn't really say I had any other major takeaways. I agree with you with Van Jefferson, and honestly, the more the coaching staff and Arthur Smith talks about Van Jefferson, the more excited I am to see him in, a meaningful game and see what he can do, because he had success the year the Rams won the Super Bowl at 800 something yards, 5 touchdowns, 50 catches. And if he can do, that as the number 2 receiver this year, I think the Steelers are going to be just fine. So I am excited to see what he can do. And I did like what I saw out of him, even with just the one catch. And like you said, it should have been 2. I don't know why the Steelers didn't challenge, especially because this year, the Texans challenged earlier in the game, because this year you have the new rule where if the first challenge is correct, you keep it, you don't lose it. So you essentially get 3 challenges if the first challenge is correct. So it would have been, nice to see Mike Tomlin on the competition committee throw the flag there. And, if he had to utilize that rule, he could have utilized that rule. But whatever reason, maybe they saw something upstairs that we didn't see on the TV or the All-22 or whatever that would have somehow negated it, but it certainly looked like a catch from Van Jefferson. So yeah, I was happy to see him play well. Overall, the run game, Jonathan Ward, I thought looked good. We'll see what the deal is with him as he suffered an injury in camp this week. Edwards, but I don't think Edwards is much beyond a practice squad role. So yeah, the individual performances I think were a little bit more solid than the overall tape kind of showed, given, that they couldn't really put up points and they lost. But individually, I think there's a lot of good stuff to take away from that game.
Yeah, and I mean, we said it, but Fields, I think, had a okay, decent performance in most areas. But unfortunately for him, 3 drives, 0 points. And now Russell Wilson, as Mike Tomlin said today, he's the starter for the second preseason game. I think he, 4 drives he's given Wilson. So, unless Wilson matches that with 0 touchdowns, that would be very discouraging. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Russell's going to be able to go down there, get, maybe 1 or 2 scores in those 4 drives. And if he does, I don't want to say puts the nail in the coffin of this competition, if you believe there is a competition still. But certainly, I mean, everything we've been told about pole position would make a lot more sense at that point. So moving into our second topic, and we'll talk a little bit more about the preseason here when we talk about our camp battles in a bit. But the Falcons making some big moves over the last couple of days. They had rookie, Braylon Trice, I think, yes, get injured the other day. Is he out for the season? I can't remember exactly the prognosis there. So that's a big hit for them. They were counting on him to kind of help their pass rush that they've been trying to fix for years now, it seems like. And they went out, and I think we mentioned earlier in the show, but they got Matthew Judon, which is a huge addition for them from the Patriots. He's been a very solid player for a while now, and I think he is going to give the Steelers tackles a pretty significant run for their money. Both Jones and Fauntanu or more, really any of them are going to have their hands full with Judon. And they also added today Justin Simmons, safety, to pair with Jesse Bates. I mean, that's one of the better safety tandems in the league now. I think both of them are kind of more center field or free safety type. So, it's maybe a little bit awkward of a scheme fit for me. But in terms of just the talent they have back there now, certainly their defense has received a large upgrade. Joe, what do you expect in terms, it's obviously only how many days now until the opener? It's like 24 or 25 days or something like that until the first regular season game. Are you more worried about this game now with these additions, or is it kind of too late in the process for them to be, assimilated right away? Where are you coming in on that?
I would say that I think those 2 additions definitely made me a little bit more worried for this Falcons game, because I think if you went in, you looked at the Falcons and you saw all right, they have Kirk Cousins at quarterback, they have Drake London, they have Kyle Pitts, they have Bijan Robinson. That's a tough offense to stop. And you look at the Steelers defense and it's all right, hey, we got the pieces in place. We can kind of, mitigate them enough that the offense can do enough. Because their defense, even with Braylon Trice healthy, even Harrison Hand was a 4th-string cornerback. He's on IR now too. But even with the guy, fully healthy defense as they had it, coming into training camp, there were still some question marks. There were still some holes that you looked at and you're like, all right, maybe the Steelers can move the ball enough. And I expected like a 24-17 or 24-21 type of game all along. I thought it was going to be close. But now you had Judon, who it really is one of the premier pass rushers in the league. He had a great year 2 seasons ago in New England. Last year, I think he got hurt week 4 or week 5 that ended his season. And he comes now. The Steelers fans should be very familiar with him in Baltimore. He's a little bit older, but he still hasn't really lost that production. I think 2 years ago, New England was one of the best seasons he's had in his career, if not the best. He was getting legitimate defensive player of the year consideration at points. And that's going to be really, really tough for this offensive line. Even, Fautanu's a rookie. Goddard Jones has looked shaky at times in pass protection last season. So we'll see if he can rebound. And then Dan Moore Jr. He's the most experienced of the bunch, but we'll see. Judon's a beast, and Dan Moore Jr. has had his struggles against talented offensive or defensive linemen edge rushers in the past. And then Justin Simmons, I agree with you. Him and Bates are probably, they are very similar players, but that's 2 ball hawking safeties out there now. And if the Steelers want to throw the ball deep, that's going to be, on one side of the field, you have Justin Simmons. One side of the field, you have Jesse Bates. So 2 very, very talented safeties. I think Simmons even came in this year, number 37 or something in the NFL top 100 players list. So he's a guy that's still, very, very, very talented. So it's definitely given me some pause over. I kind of had this marked down as a win for the Steelers. It was going to be a close win, but I had it marked down as a win. And now I think it's going to be, a really, really close game. So I'm excited to watch it. I'm a little bit worried though because as we've talked about before on the show multiple times, the second half of the Steelers schedule is brutal, and it's going to be important to get off to a strong start. And we've talked about how the early portion of the schedule still isn't even all that easy. And this game just got a whole lot harder given the Falcons' additions in the last 2 days.
Yeah, Judon, like you said, he finished with how many points here? He had 2 vote points for Defensive Player of the Year in 2022. Between 2021 and 2022, he had 28 sacks. So yeah, I mean he's gonna give them some issues there, and I would not be surprised at all if he has a sack or maybe multiple sacks in that game, especially based on what we saw from Fauntanu in week 1, and especially if Fauntanu can't appear in another preseason game to kind of knock some of the rust off and get more comfortable. So yeah, very concerning there. And as far as the deep safety stuff between Bates and Simmons, I do think a big part of the Steelers' offense is, especially you're not always going to be able to scheme Pickens open, and they're going to be running the ball heavily. They're going to be doing a lot of play action and trying to get guys like Scotty Miller and Calvin Austin III and Roman Wilson once he returns. They're going to be trying to get these guys, to blow the top off of defenses, and I think that's certainly going to be a challenge against the Falcons. How important? I mean, this win, it's week 1 in terms of just like the put the brutal back half of the schedule aside. In terms of just like for Russell Wilson, for the media, for Justin Fields, for all the different narratives that might pop up, especially Russell Wilson's going to be playing the Broncos the very next week. So how important is this win just to set the tone at the beginning of the season, opening up on the road, playing against Kirk Cousins, another displaced quarterback, and fending off some of these uncomfortable kind of quarterback conversations early in the season? Is this one, really important for the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not of the belief that, a week 1 win is like super important. Like, obviously, yeah, it gets the season off to the right start, gets you off on the right foot, but the Steelers went 10-7 last year and they got blown out week 1. There's been seasons that made the playoffs and lost week 1. I mean, 2019, they didn't make the playoffs. They got absolutely demolished by the Patriots week 1. I have nightmares about that game. But I do think, given, the personnel changes this season, bringing in Arthur Smith, Russell Wilson, improving the defense, even with Patrick Queen. I do think it's a little bit more important to kind of get the season off on the right foot and build some momentum. If they lose, is it the end of the world? Absolutely not. I mean, it's a good Falcons team. It's a Falcons team that should win the NFC South and make the playoffs. So it's not the end of the world, but given everything that they've done this offseason and just the focus and the importance on, making the playoffs and winning in the playoffs this year, I do think getting off on the right foot is a little bit more important than it has been in years past. I would probably, 6.5 out of 10 if I had to rank it in terms of the importance of winning, just because it is week 1. It's one game. You lose one game, fine. You're 0-1. They should realistically beat the Broncos in week 2. But now if they lose week 1, the pressure's all the way ramped up. They're playing the Broncos in Denver, which is a tough place to win, especially in September. And so it's gonna be interesting to see. I think ultimately it's a game they should still win, even with the moves that Atlanta has made. It just made it a lot tougher. But I mean, the Steelers should be a good offensive team. You think maybe, I don't know, maybe Arthur Smith gets in his bag a little bit, wants to get revenge on his former team. Obviously that's just wishful thinking there, but yeah, I think it's fairly important. I wouldn't say it's extremely important. I wouldn't say it's not important, but I wouldn't be super concerned ringing the alarm bell if they lose. And even, you look at week 1 last year, they lost Cam Hayward and Deontay Johnson and got blown out, and they still powered through and, were competitive throughout the season. So, look at stuff like that. It kind of eases, my concerns a little bit if they do wind up losing this game. But I think it's one that, it's moderately important for them to, get off on the right start and win this game.
Yeah, I just think from the media narratives angle of it, especially, if in a world where the Steelers are 0-2 out of these first 2 and come back to Acrisure Stadium and maybe Russell Wilson hasn't played well, Steelers fans haven't exactly been shy about voicing their opinion as of late, especially around quarterback situations. And I think Justin Fields built himself a pretty nice fan base throughout training camp. And, it seems like the kind of, I don't want to say everybody, I think a lot of people are still kind of in agreement that Russell Wilson's the best bet for right now. But I think there are a lot of people that want to see Fields get the job sooner than later. And so I think for Russell's sake specifically, it is very important to get off to a quick start. But we'll move into our third topic and just generally talking about camp competitions. I think my big takeaway in terms of camp competitions is that far fewer of them are sorted out than I thought they would be at this point in the process. Yeah, I mean, they've only played one preseason game so far. There's still plenty to go, but I feel like I've had a better idea of some of the competitions coming out of past training camps than I do now. Is there a specific camp battle you want to start with here, Joe?
So the one that I think kind of intrigues me the most is on the defensive line. I feel like you're kind of looking at three guys probably for one spot, and that's Logan Lee, DeMarvin Leal, and Isaiah Loudermilk. I think Logan Lee, even though he's shown his versatility, he's done a number of things. I think it's safe to assume that he's going to be a practice squad guy to start the season. He didn't have, it wasn't really a standout in the preseason debut. He did move around a little bit, played inside, played a little bit outside, but I think if you just break down Leal versus Loudermilk, it's a very interesting debate right now because Leal has had a good camp, but it comes with the caveat of when he's been on the field. He missed time earlier in camp. He's missed, chunks. I think he's missed this entire week, honestly, unless he practiced today with an injury. And as they say, your best ability is availability. And Leal hasn't necessarily always been available, and that's been a recurring problem throughout his career. So yeah, he's down to 275. He can play outside linebacker. He had the sack in the preseason game, and he's looked really good. And he's your third round pick. But if you can't stay on the field, you're risking keeping an extra, keeping him as a defensive lineman. He gets hurt, then you have to pull from somewhere else to pull somebody up. So it's him versus Isaiah Loudermilk, whereas Loudermilk has been healthy. He's been on the field. Maybe he hasn't been as splashy or made as many big plays as Leal has, but the team's pretty comfortable and familiar with what he can do. And it seems at least as he's made a few plays and he's taken a little bit of a step up this season and developed. So if it does come down to those two spots, that's what's going to be interesting to me is you're looking at Leal. He's a former third round pick. You can get a lot more out of him maybe, but you have the question mark of if he's going to stay on the field and stay healthy versus Loudermilk, where there might not be as much boom or might not be as high as an upside, but the floor is going to be higher because if you need him to play, you can get him to play. So, I mean, I suppose maybe they can make the move and keep Leal and risk sending Loudermilk to the practice squad. Who knows how, highly valued he is around the league. Maybe he's a guy that he could be on the practice squad and come up if Leal gets hurt. But that's one that I think to me right now stands out as an interesting one, just given, the two factors there. And it's two guys that have been Leal hasn't really been on the bubble before, but Loudermilk's been on the roster bubble probably the last two training camps, especially last year. And he's fought through and made the roster and been able to make, whatever impact he can. So that's one that I think is definitely intriguing as we go through the last two preseason games and is one to watch pretty closely.
Yeah, 30 snaps for Leal, 29 for Loudermilk in that game. And, Loudermilk has an uphill battle in my eyes just because he's on his last year of his contract. And Leal, they have team control next year as well. And defensive line depth and, the future of the defensive line is still kind of up in the air. So a guy like Leal makes more sense to keep around. But yeah, I mean, if he's getting injured, that's obviously an issue. So we'll have to track that over the next couple of preseason games here. But I do think Leal has the inside track in that one. The one that's interesting to me, I mean, we talked about the O-line a little bit. I think, Nate Herbig's injury has kind of opened the door for Frazier. I mean, there's a chance here. I think Tomlin left the door open for Herbig to participate in the game tomorrow, but I would kind of lean towards not since he didn't practice today. And, there's a good chance that by the time Herbig gets healthy that, Frazier's basically seized control of that starting job and Herbig returns to basically being the backup. I think that is a distinct possibility Especially, I think even before Herbig's injury, Tomlin had said there's going to be increased opportunities, or an increased workload is what he said about Frazier, and that was before Herbig got injured. So the plan was already to start to get him more involved. I think Herbig's injury kind of accelerates that. We've already talked about the tackle competition. I do think that the bit about Broderick and Dan Moore competing on the left side is kind of funky to me. I don't know what's going on there, but I mean, that's a product of Broderick not getting that much work on the left side, unfortunately. So Tomlin today said that, Troy being out doesn't have any bearing on what's happening there and how many reps Broderick gets on the left. And then I think Broderick Jones himself after practice said something like, right now I have to focus on being the right tackle because Troy Fautanu's out. And so very clearly, he's going to be kind of stuck at right until Fautanu's able to come back, and that complicates the nature of that competition over on the left if what Dulac said is true, and it's kind of more of a competition between Broderick and Dan Moore. So that one's interesting to me. I think the slot corner became a whole lot more interesting. Was that just today or yesterday that Graylin Arnold was waived, injured? So he had been running with the first team for the last week. I know Beanie Bishop Jr., the undrafted free agent, had been working with the first team over the first couple of weeks of camp. And I think this week, Graylin Arnold had kind of gotten more healthy because he had been dealing with something. Now he's back injured. He's, gone. So that paves the way for Beanie Bishop to be that week 1 starter, but they're going to need more competition. Cam Sutton's out for the first 8 weeks. You can't just have an undrafted free agent in there. I think Thomas Graham Jr. is one of the most interesting, and specifically some of the words that defensive coordinator Terrell Austin had to say about him when asked during his press conference this week. His face kind of lit up a little bit when they mentioned Thomas Graham, and he basically just said, if anytime he's looking and there's a play being made, he looks around and, Thomas Graham Jr. is somewhere near the ball. So he said that he's been kind of constantly making plays, and he's shown that ability, and I think that certainly could earn him an opportunity. So it'll be interesting to see if Thomas Graham Jr. starts to get some of those first team reps. Not somebody that was on, our radar, I think, for first team slot opportunities, but injuries have happened, and he's been kind of making the most of his opportunities in camp. I don't know if it still holds true, but he had 2 or maybe 3 interceptions, which was tied for the lead in camp stats that Alex Kozora put together. And so, yeah, I think that one's very, very interesting to me. A lot of people want to see Beanie Bishop Jr. Succeed, but I do think they need somebody to kind of take some of the third down slot role away from Bishop and just kind of give him the first and second down stuff. I think that's how Mike Tomlin's kind of described it thus far. And so that one is very interesting to me. Are there any other camp battles that you want to talk about before we wrap up the show, Joe?
Yeah, I just think the outside linebacker 4 battle, I wrote about it after the game on Friday. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. I mean, you have Julius Welsh off there, who I think is probably the odd man out, but you have Jeremiah Moon and you have Kyron Johnson. Both of them, or Johnson especially, has had a good camp. Moon I mean, during training camp, I think he was pretty solid when he played. And then you just kind of look at the special teams upside for the two of them. And Mike Tomlin did say this week, or Terrell Austin did say this week, I believe, that that's what it's going to come down to, is special teams of the two of them. They both made a splash play in the preseason opener. Like I said earlier, Moon had the sack, Johnson had the tackle for a loss. Johnson played a lot more than Moon, which I wrote that can be kind of construed in 2 ways. Either, the team likes what they've seen out of Moon and they're confident in him, or they really wanted to see a lot more out of Johnson and see what he can do. And Johnson was, a pretty important special teamer for the Eagles 2 years ago when they made the run to the Super Bowl. He played significant special team snaps when he was elevated to the active roster and later signed to the active roster for the Steelers. The team claimed Moon from, Baltimore, and he's physically imposing. He's a huge dude, and he's seemingly made some plays. And I think heading into camp, he was, the presumed favorite for that job. But I think Kyron Johnson's pushed him a lot more than I think we maybe thought or even gave Johnson credit for, given, his NFL pedigree. So I'm excited to see where that goes the next 2 games, especially when you look at special teams and see, where those guys played. They had a fairly even, I believe, special teams allotment of reps in the preseason opener. Nobody really, stood out or made any big plays, but I'm excited to see those next two games, where they fit in on special teams, where the reps are, distributed in that unit particularly, and if one of the two of them can kind of make a big impact on the defensive side of the ball, as that's, it's still important, even though their main role is going to be special teams as the fourth outside linebacker, but it's still important when they get on the field in defense to see if they can make some plays. So they did in the first game, and we'll see if they can keep doing so going forward.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add there. Julius Welshoff probably will, like you said, be the odd man out, but they can stash him on the practice squad with an exemption, so he won't count against the practice squad limit, I believe. So that is, probably a lock to happen. I can't imagine somebody would claim him or sign him once the Steelers release Welshoff. So that is everything for our show today. I do want to plug. We do need some more questions from you guys, so give us a call at 412-254-3145. Again, that's 412-254-3145. Leave us a voicemail for a chance to have your question answered on a future episode. As we're ramping back up into the season, I'm sure there are a lot of questions that you guys have, and we would love to answer them for you. I think that's all for today. I'm Ross McCorkle, that's Joe Clark, and we will catch you guys next time.